Do you see yourself as someone who's poking the bear, or do you see yourself as someone who is trying to explore some of these topics?
I quite like that metaphor, poking the bear, because it's quite neutral. We can think of the bear as a nice bear, like Paddington Bear, or we can think of the bear as a nasty bear, like a grizzly or whatever that attacks you. I like to think that I'm poking the hornet's nest, or I'm poking something that's inherently nasty.
I always explain to them that I worked for the government for 10 years, and once you've seen the level of incompetence within government, it stops you believing that there's some sort of Machiavellian Svengali pulling the strings and running everything, because they can't run the simple things in our society in a competent manner.
Their so-called enlightened ideas are really just a reflection of their full bellies and central heating. And the fact that they don't have to really worry about anything, the fact that they've never been subject to natural stressors.
Hi everybody, and welcome back to Nick Talks. This episode's amazing guest is Edward Dutton, also known as a Jolly Heretic from YouTube. This is a man I've wanted to talk to for quite a while. He's actually an evolutionary psychologist, which we'll get into in a minute, because even I don't know what that is. And his claim to fame is the moral superior group called Hope Not Hate has also branded him a pseudo-scientific race scientist, which I would use as a badge of honor if that crazy group have, and the way they attack people for absolutely nothing. So let's get into that. So first of all, welcome Ed to the show.
Well, thank you very much, Nick. Thank you for having me on. Pleasure to meet you.
Thank you. My first question is, what is a evolutionary psychologist?
Well, evolutionary psychology is the idea that humans are an advanced form of ape, and part of their behavior can be understood in terms of adaptations, psychological adaptations to their environment, which are at least partly genetic in nature. So it's understanding really the inbuilt psychological cognitive biases of humans as an animal that are evolved to their particular ecology.
Could you give us a really, really simple example of that?
Well, for example, we are evolved to over-detect agency. If you put a person under a high degree of stress, then a person becomes highly instinctive, and our instincts, our cognitive biases hit in. And one of those is that in such a situation, we will tend to be strongly inclined to assume that whatever is happening is caused by some agent, some person, some group of people, some being. And it's been argued this is one of the reasons why we tend to, at times of stress, become religious and believing in God. Now, why has this over-detection of agency happened? Well, there's a number of reasons. One reason would be that we are highly pro-social. So if you are very, very focused on the external signals of internal states, then you will read those social signals better, and you will get on better with people, and you will transpose that over detection of social signals into the world itself, so you will therefore perceive the existence of a god, or whatever. And the other reason is that if you are in a dangerous situation in a forest and you hear a sound, well, if you dismiss that, if that's a wolf and you dismiss that as nothing, then you get killed. But if that's nothing and you're paranoid and you think it's a wolf, then you've lost nothing basically, and you survive. And so that fact would mean that it would be adaptive to over-detect agency. So that would be an example of one of our cognitive biases.
Would this also explain why lots of people believe in conspiracy theories?
Yes, exactly. So you can conceive of religion as a bundle of adaptive traits that have come together into this bundle that we call religion, as we understand it at the moment. And if you look at very primitive tribes, such as the Yanomami of Venezuela, well, their religion's not quite like ours. It's a little bit different. But what they have in common is these adaptive traits, such as following the leader, such as over-detecting agency, such as over-detecting causation and being very interested in causation, and so on. And I think that this comes together in the conspiracy theory precisely, that you are over-detecting agency, you are assuming there is some kind of agent involved in whatever's going on, when even if a simpler explanation might be that it's coincidence or that it's a broad social process, and you are over-detecting causation. You're assuming that there can't be a coincidence or whatever. So, for example, when Joe Cox was murdered during the referendum campaign, you had people quite quickly saying, "Oh, this is deliberate. The government have deliberately killed her. They've taken her out in order to rig the result of the referendum campaign in favour of Remain." Now, there's no reason really to think that. It's not logical, but that's a reaction that you'll get if people are highly stressed, which people are at times of change, are highly instinctive. Then you start to think, oh, it must be a conspiracy. It must all be a malevolent conspiracy of something going on.
When I've spoken to people about conspiracy theory, especially when it involves government and the UK government, I always explain to them that I worked for the government for 10 years. And once you've seen the level of incompetence within government, it stops you believing that there's some sort of Machiavellian Svengali pulling the strings and running everything, because they can't run the simple things in our society in a competent manner.
Or similarly, I mean, you don't just have to work for the government, but in your case, I mean, who gave you your MBE? Was it the Queen, Prince Charles? Who was it that gave it to you?
The person who physically gave it me was the Lord Lieutenant of Greater Manchester.
Okay, all right. Well, but if you meet people who are of high social status or who are members of the aristocracy, then you will know they're just people. They bleed like everybody else. But if you live in a highly polarized society, and also in a highly class-ridden society where people don't tend to have much to do with people who are of different social classes from them, then that as well militates in favor of it becoming easier to conceive of the kind of David Ickean idea that, oh, we're ruled by lizards, and that it's almost as though they're a different species. And all of this kind of thing. Whereas if you go to, let's say, a prestigious university and you meet these people, you meet people that have been to Eton and whose grandfathers are baronets or whatever, then of course it's quite clear to you that they're just people like everybody else. But the point from an evolutionary psychological perspective is that we have these evolved cognitive adaptations or cognitive biases. One of them, as I said, is over-detecting agency, over-detecting causation, following the leader, and religion, basically, religiousness. These different biases have come together in the form of religiousness, and religiousness, let's define it as the collective worship of a moral God or something like that. These themselves then become selected for. So the heritability of that kind of religiosity, for example, the heritability of having a religious experience, an intense religious experience, is about 0.7, with 1 being absolute. So that's very high. So it implies that people who are of that nature, it's a strongly genetic, not completely, but a strongly genetic issue. So that's the kind of area. That's my area that I focus on substantially. Is the evolutionary psychology of religion. There are others, but that's one of the examples.
No, thank you for that. You cover and talk about lots of what we would now say controversial subjects, which shouldn't be controversial. We should be able to discuss all subjects and all matter and try to get to the heart of it. But people would say you cover some controversial subjects. My wife says to me that sometimes I poke the bear, that I'm not trying to get a reaction, but I talk about and discuss subjects that are going to be controversial, that are going to get a reaction. But I don't do it for the reaction. I do it because I want to. Do you see yourself as someone who's poking the bear, or do you see yourself as someone who is trying to explore some of these topics?
I quite like that metaphor, poking the bear, because it's quite neutral. We can think of the bear as a nice bear, like Paddington Bear, or we can think of the bear as a nasty bear, like a grizzly or whatever that attacks you. I like to think that I'm poking the hornet's nest, or I'm poking something that's inherently nasty, which is that if people say to you, these are the facts, this is it, and if you don't believe it, then you're evil. Then and they're doing that, by the way, because doing that and signaling their adherence to those dogmas and is a way for them to have power over you and everybody else. And it's an expression, their extremeness and their dogmatism is in part an expression of their sort of mental instability, which underpins their desire to control others and their desire to be admired and their desire to, which boosts their flagging self-esteem and their desire to feel superior. And those people like those cunts that hope not hate, pardon my French, will say to you that, then that the very fact that they say it makes me think, well, what have you got to hide? Because the fact that you're so dogmatic implies you have secret doubts. And if you have secret doubts, then surely if I pursue those, if I interrogate those, then I will get to the truth about the nature of the world. So the very fact that something is in that sense dogmatic and therefore questioning it is controversial, that attracts me like a moth to a woke flame. It makes me think, well, there must be something. That's what to look at then. I mean, the very fact that these people are reacting like this tells me they've got something to hide. Why have they got something to hide? Well, because it empowers them to hide it. And I want to know about the nature of the world. I don't know. I guess it's a sort of autistic trait in me. I want to know how things are working. It makes me feel better to know how everything works and fits together. I like knowing those things. And so, for example, I wasn't remotely interested in transsexuality and looking at the reasons for this until it became this thing that you're not allowed to talk about, until it became taboo, until you would be thrown off social media for labeling a biological man who a he. And then suddenly it becomes interesting, because suddenly, well, what's going on here? What have they got to hide? What's going on here? Why do they react so furiously to us, to scientists interrogating their claim that they are, in most cases it is this way around, females born in a male body? Why do they what's the problem? And of course, once you interrogate it and once you look into it in detail, you realize exactly why, because it's basically a religion in which we are gods, effectively. God, it says in the Bible, I am who I am. It's asserting we can define who we are. We are little chinks of light in an evil world of darkness. We are little mini gods, and we can define who we are. But it's contradictory, because you can't define what race you are, although it's moving towards that. You get people saying, I identify as Korean. I can define who I am, and then there's the evil gods, the devils that question this, and that's this kind of theology, and so therefore that attracts me. So it's the very fact that people like Hope Not Hate say you can't look at this or you're morally deficient, which makes me think, well, A, what is it in your psychology that you need to feel that you're morally superior to other people and go on about it? What is it in you that makes you the Pharisee that wants to make sure everyone knows you're good? The person that gives money at the offering to be seen to do so, and B, well, what is it you're hiding?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I look at it as information's power. So the woke don't want us to look at certain subjects in case we find out the information in that. Just like we had religious churches who would have the Bible in Latin because no one could read Latin, no one could read. If you can control the narrative, you can control the information, you then have power over other people because they have to believe what you say is righteous or correct or true. Indeed,
and the internet has been an enormous problem in that regard. I remember it struck me when 25 years ago, when people like Blair or whatever were talking about, the information superhighway, isn't it going to be great? And I thought, no, it's not going to be great. It's going to be something like what publishing did in the 16th century. It's going to cause a huge change. And of course, it has been an enormous change that's changed everything to an incredible degree, and done so very quickly. It's basically like a new revolution, like the Industrial Revolution or whatever that we've lived through. And they can't control this. But you've got to ask yourself, what is the psychology of these kinds of people that want to control other people? And it's very interesting, because if you look at the studies on this, the psychology of these leftists, one is they are high in Machiavellianism, so they really, really, really want power. Two, if you look at their moral circle, most people's moral circle is a series of concentric circles based around them. So you like your family more than you like your friends, more than you like your nation, and your nation more than you like foreign nations, and so on and so on and so on. So you identify with people that are genetically close to you. Leftists identify with people that are genetically distant from them. i.e. people of a different social class, or foreigners, or different race, or different species. And that, of course, means that they're kind of born traitors. They can collaborate with outsiders to get power within their own group, the kind of George Galloway type. And so they're individualists, and there's research on this moral foundations, it's called, because we are pack animals, but because we have to rise to the top of the pack in prehistory to pass on our genes. We have these two sets of inclinations. One is individualizing foundations, equality, i.e. making sure everyone gets the same so that you get the same, and harm avoidance, i.e. making sure everyone's not harmed so you're not harmed. That's individualizing. And then binding or group foundations, which is sanctity, be discussed, so basically it's in group borders, obedience to authority and loyalty to your group. And people that are conservative, broadly conservative, have been found to be high on all five of these foundations, whereas people that are liberal found to be low on the binding foundations and high on the individualizing foundations. So they are actually individualists. So they're Machiavellian, and so of course they're high in narcissism. So they like being adored and looked up to and whatever. And so this inclines them to be left wing in a leftist society. And they're also high in mental instability. So just in feeling negative feelings strongly, such as jealousy. And jealousy is what motivates a lot of leftist ideas. It's outrageous, others have got more than me, I'm envious, I'm jealous, but also just anxiety, social anxiety, and general mental instability. And so if you're high in these traits, then you can see that if you're high in anxiety and whatever, and you're paranoid about other people, and you're jealous of other people, and you're really high in just lots of negative feelings, then first of all, you can deal with that via creating a kind of false self, a narcissistic ideal of yourself as the perfect moral person, and then you can project outwards your own feelings of negativity towards yourself onto other people, which is exactly what people like Hope Not Hate do. Secondly, you will want power over people because you'll be paranoid of them and you'll fear them, and so therefore this will make you Machiavellian and power hungry, and also you're just an individualist, so you want power. And thirdly, you will be paranoid, so you'll fear a fair fight. You'll be concerned that you'll be beaten in a fair fight, and so you won't play for status overtly in a fight, but covertly, via virtue signaling, and so therefore, ironically, the very people that are the most individualist will try and come across as the most group oriented. They will virtue signal about equality and harm. So all I want is a group where the importance of the group and everyone feels equal and everyone feels happy and all this. Whereas in reality, it is a means of basically cowards getting power. And what tends to happen is that, I've looked at this in a book I've done called The Past as a Future Country, The Coming Conservative Demographic Revolution, is that because conservatives value all five moral foundations, but liberals only value two, there is asymmetric empathy. So the conservative can understand the liberal. He knows where the liberal's coming from because he feels that as well. He feels sad when little babies get hurt or whatever. But the liberal cannot understand the conservative. And so the result is that things will always tend to move in a liberal direction. And they'll carry on doing this until you basically just get a evolutionary mismatch, chaos, lots of unhappy people, war. And then there'll be a conservative backlash. Something like that, I think, happened in the late 70s. You had such chaos that there was and also the rise of AIDS, and the result was a conservative backlash for a period of time, and societies seem to go through these sort of cycles like that.
No, really, really, really interesting. There's a couple of points there that I'm going to spend some time thinking about. Let's talk about your YouTube channel. Why did you set up your YouTube channel? It's not very often we get a university professor setting up a YouTube channel to talk about things that most people in his profession don't want him to talk about.
I'm only an honorary professor at this place. I mean, I'm basically a freelance researcher, but with funding from various people. I'm far too unwoke to be. But with the YouTube channel, it was just people. I did various lectures and things, and people thought they were good, and that they told me I was a good speaker, and they started saying, this is about 10 years ago. you should set up a YouTube channel. And I said, no, I can't do that. That's what like the young people do, the millennial people, and the people that are younger than me. I can't do that. I don't know. It's just a totally new thing I don't like. And also, I'm quite conservative and resistant to change, and it was change and something new, and I just couldn't conceive of it. And then other people started saying, oh, you should do it. You should set up a YouTube channel. And so eventually I did, and I had this in about 2018, I think, or 2019, and I had this idea of calling it the Jolly Heretic, because people say I'm an academic heretic and that I question the dogmas and so forth, like a heretic does. And when I was a kid, there was this pub near where my grandparents lived in Winchester, called the Jolly Farmer. And I thought, well, the farmer smiling, and I thought, wouldn't it be funny to have a pub called the Jolly Heretic, with a heretic being burned at the stake for heresy or whatever, smiling? I thought that would be, and so I liked the idea of the title, so I called it the Jolly Heretic. And then I just did sort of one video, and then got not people watched it, and I got bored and I stopped doing it. And then I was interviewed at the beginning of 2019 on a show called The Delling Pod by James Dellingpole, about a new book that I had coming out at the time called At Our Wits' End: Why We're Becoming Less Intelligent and What It Means for the Future. And then loads and loads of people watched it, and I thought, well, and all the people were like writing to me and stuff, and so I thought, well, maybe there's something to it, this internet, this YouTubing lark. Well, I'll give it a go. So then I did another video, and then quite a few people watched it, and then I knew somebody who knew somebody who'd had quite a significant internet channel in the past, no longer does, and that person gave me advice on what to do and so forth. And then before long, it just sort of exploded, and other YouTubers were saying, wow, it's been meteoric, this rise, it's really, really quick. And then I discovered the concept of live streaming, and then it just sort of developed more and more popular. And then I noticed it hugely significant to selling your books. In the old days, it would be that you would write books, and that was it. Now, if you're going to publish a book, they expect you to have an internet presence, and they expect you to have a channel and whatever. And it really helps you. And years ago, I used to, if I had some research out, then maybe the journal would get in touch with a newspaper, and I might be interviewed in the Telegraph or something like that. That is nothing compared to conveying your research to people, to this, YouTube and the internet and so forth. And I was so, I don't know, old-fashioned, but I didn't really understand that. So it just sort of took off, and then it became this community, really, I suppose. This idea of an online in lockdown, this idea of an online public house. And I'm the landlord of the public house, and then somebody else is the squire of the village in which it's based, and then somebody else is the vicar, and I always have a beer, and they send in questions and all this sort of thing, and I don't know, it's just sort of taken off, really. It's a strange thing.
No, your channel is in my top 3 favorite channels that I watch on YouTube, and I love your channel because not only is it educational, but it's academic. And I'll be honest, some of the things you talk about every now and again, some parts of it just go right above my head, but most of it doesn't. And even if I don't fully understand it, I get the point you're trying to make. And these aren't your opinions mainly. You're normally talking about peer-reviewed papers that other people have looked into and other people have investigated. And you're trying to spread that information that other people have discovered. And lots of the things you talk about, I sit there and I go, yeah, that makes sense. And some of it I go, not only does it make sense, but I knew that to be true. I just didn't know how I knew it to be true.
That's interesting. I mean, I think a lot of what we find in evolutionary psychology is it tends to, one of the things that they will say in leftist psychology and sociology is say, oh, we should challenge stereotypes. And it's our duty. They don't care about the truth. The truth is much less important for them than the political message, the political crusade. We should challenge stereotypes and da da da. And what you increasingly find with science, with actual proper scientific research, is it backs up stereotypes. So stereotypes exist for a reason, and that is basically that they're true. In fact, there was a study some time ago which found that approximately 75% of racial stereotypes are either partially or completely, I think 50% were completely true, and another 25% were at least partially true. And there's research by a guy called Lee Jussim that's found that overwhelmingly stereotypes are true. So pop psychology tends to be true, and you tend to have this disconnect because of the leftist takeover of academia, and then their promotion of equalitarian dogmas that everyone's equal and it's all to do with environment and nothing to do with heredity, and everybody can be molded into the communist obedient worker and all this stuff, which is just empirically wrong. And so they promote things which are empirically wrong, such as that there are no psychological sex differences, or there are no other psychological and so on, and everything's to do with environment. And so you get this disconnect between a massive part of academia and what ordinary people know to be true, as you put it, or implicitly know to be true, but they can't quite articulate, but they know it to be true. What I tend to find with the research I do is it simply demonstrates the veracity of things, which if you look in like literature, Shakespeare, whatever, they kind of know these things. They know these things. They haven't done statistical studies or whatever, but they kind of know these things. It's sort of pop sociology or pop psychology. And that is a big part of what I've ended up doing. So, for example, I wrote this book a while ago on, it's called Sent Before Their Time, Prematurity, Genius, Charisma, and Being Born Prematurely. And I wrote it, I was partly inspired to write it because I was born 3 months prematurely myself. And if you look in 16th century literature and also in folklore and mythology of various groups, they have all these ideas about people that are born prematurely, about them being psychopathic, about them being slightly mad, about them being very, very skilled in certain very specific areas, all these different things. And they all turn out to be statistically true. Demonstrably true. So I think a lot of what I would call based social science, i.e. based in reality, ends up doing is demonstrating quantitatively the veracity of things which people kind of in a way kind of know, because without thinking about it, they have observed it in their everyday lives.
Another problem I've realised is we seem, at our current age now, we seem to think that everybody who went before us were stupid, and it's only this last few generations that we've become enlightened and we're clever, and we're cleverer than the people who went before. And I know that not to be true, because from what I've read, we've hardly changed in tens, hundred thousands of years. Technology's changed, but I feel that's a way for people today who have achieved nothing to be able to criticize people from the past and say, I'm better than Winston Churchill, I'm better than the founding fathers of America, I'm better than... They can point back and say, I'm better than, because of something I believe today, even though I've achieved nothing in my life today.
Exactly. I mean, they and ironically, it would be those same kind of people that will say, oh, you shouldn't be proud of your nationality. That's not something you've achieved. Why are you proud of it? You shouldn't be proud of your whatever. But they're proud of being modern, enlightened people. And they don't seem to understand that their so-called enlightened ideas are really just a reflection of their full bellies and central heating, and the fact that they don't have to really worry about anything, the fact that they've never been subject to natural stressors. And you only have to go back a handful of generations for the child mortality rate to be 50%. For almost everybody to experience the death of a child, the death of a brother, the death of a sister, the early death of a parent, to die young themselves, to have all kinds of terrible diseases, to be constantly under the stress of mortality salience and think they're going to die, to be constantly under stress of invasion from foreign countries and whatever else. And so you can't really compare yourself to people like that. But you have to ask yourself, what would you be like? What would you be like if you were in those circumstances? And we have some knowledge of what those people are like in those circumstances, but from COVID, which is that they just go mad. They go absolutely mad. They desperately want authoritarianism of just the kind which you had a few hundred years ago. They desperately want the end of all democratic liberties. They project all their insecurities onto those that don't agree and try to destroy them. But then it goes away again. So they wouldn't cope very well. And also the idea that that these people can take the credit for the whole of the modern world, as if it was them who, centuries ago, in an agricultural economy, were intelligent enough to innovate the Industrial Revolution and were brave enough to go against the norms of the society and question it with all of the opprobrium that involves. And of course they weren't. We are collectively this sort of we have ancestors who, let's conceive of it in terms of social class. Our ancestors were working class people born in the most appalling drudgery and poverty, who through their own absolute brilliance, intelligence, diligence and genius pulled themselves out of living in a hovel with an outside loo and rats and fleas to the heights of achievement. And we collectively are the sort of privately educated, smug, indulged, decadent, low IQ son of that genius that is frittering away his inheritance, his trust fund, in the biggest show of decadence that history has ever seen. And I see it in terms of building up capital. So we have this amazing father who's built up this amazing business, and it just builds up capital. And all we have to do to keep it ticking away and building up more capital is through major innovations, the major innovations of the Industrial Revolution, which are underpinned by geniuses, which are outlier high IQ combined with sort of moderately psychopathic traits. Because if you have those traits, then you will, if you're moderately low in impulse control, then you're low in rule following, you think outside the box, you can conceive of the unconceivable. If you're moderately low in agreeableness, you don't care about offending people. In fact, you quite like offending people, or you autistically can't conceive of the fact that you will offend people. You're just interested in the truth. And it's those traits which create the genius. And then intelligence, as we know, I've looked at this in a lot of detail, intelligence is in decline. We are genetically breeding against intelligence. And so even if we're becoming less intelligent, we can keep going and make society more advanced by just minor tinkering, minor innovations that build up the capital. But eventually, as we get stupider and stupider and stupider, and as we adopt policies which militate against the nurturing of genius, we shut down the universities and make them into woke religious madrasas, so that they are no longer promoting genius, and we shut speech codes and all this stuff. Then eventually we won't be able to make the innovations, and eventually we'll just be eating into the capital. And once that happens, of course, then you have a society in decline, a society that can't do things it used to be able to do. I suspect, for example, we haven't been back. We went to the moon 4 times, and we haven't been back since the early 70s. And I strongly suspect, and I may be proved wrong on this, but I strongly suspect that we just can't go back. Because the average intelligence in 1969 was a number of points higher than now, which meant that the genius types in 1969 were even more intelligent than now. And you had a culture which nurtured them and tried to bring them together and tried to bring them to their phenotypic maximum, which is the opposite of now. And so I suspect that was the height of human achievement.
Well, let's end with a final question, and the final question is about me. Your last couple of videos, you've been discussing mutants, genetic mutants, and one of the videos you mentioned that one of the signs of that is left-handedness, and I'm left-handed. So as a left-hander,
so am I.
Right, what can you deem from that, from someone being left-handed?
Well, you can't. I wrote a book some years ago called How to Judge People by What They Look Like. And it's one of my more popular books. So you can't really, if you're going to do something like that, it becomes relevant if you have a number of traits which all intercorrelate. And so in the same way that there is evidence that we can look at people and with accuracy higher than could be the case by chance, we can correctly judge their personality, what kind of personality they have, how intelligent they are, and various other psychological traits. And there are reasons we can do. There are certain. They then honed in on, well, what are the traits that are being noticed? So, for example, having a long face and a long nose correlates with intelligence, whereas a shorter, negatively, weakly. Why? Well, what's an example of a very low IQ person? What's a person with Down syndrome? And so if something goes wrong with the brain at a very early stage, then all kinds of developmental pathways are interfered with. And what you end up with is a person that has this small eyes, small face, small nose, and so on. And therefore, a person that is of low IQ but in the normal range is just going to be a less exaggerated and extreme version of that. That's the theory. And so there is a degree to which you can, I mean, pupil size at rest is associated with IQ. Why? Well, possibly because the pupil is the interface between the organism and the world. And so the more information you can take in, then the more subtly and thus correctly you can solve a problem. And therefore, the more intelligent you will come out to be. And there's all kinds of other small relationships like this, and they all add up. But as for left-handedness, left-handedness reflects two key things. One is testosterone, and the other is developmental instability. So on average, men are more left-handed than women. On average, high testosterone men are more left-handed than low testosterone men. On average, violent societies who are going to have more high testosterone men are more left-handed than peaceful societies. At the moment, in the West, about 12% of people are left-handed. Among the Yanomamo of Venezuela, whom I mentioned earlier, who are known as the fierce people and who are one of the most violent tribes, there are more violent tribes, but we haven't been able to get near them, but one of the most violent tribes that has been studied, it's about 25% based on what hand they're holding their spear with. So in Finland, interestingly, it's something like 4%. And in general, among East Asian countries and countries that have adapted to it being very cold, it selects in favor of a highly pro-social personality and also high intelligence. And so this reduces testosterone, and so therefore people are less left-handed. That's the first thing. The second thing is intelligence. There is a weak association between intelligence and being right-handed, i.e. people that are left-handed are less intelligent on average. And thirdly, and why is that? What's going on there? Well, another thing that left-handedness is a reflection of is developmental instability. So the brain is slightly skewed, and if you have a normal brain, then you should be right-handed. If you have developmental instability, then the brain is asymmetrical, then you are more likely to be left-handed. So if you have higher mutational load, you're more likely to be left-handed. So if left-handedness is associated with poorer genetic health, it's associated with poorer physical health, it's associated with poor mental health, it's associated with developmental instability. It's also associated with other things that go awry in development. So, for example, homosexuality. Male homosexuality, there is significantly elevated left-handedness among male homosexuals, even though they're lower in testosterone on average than heterosexuals. But something's going wrong in development that causes homosexuality. For example, there's this idea that the female the male fetus produces masculinizing hormones, and these emit into the female mother. The mother then reacts with feminizing hormones, and if she kind of overreacts, or the immune system of the child is the baby is suboptimal to fight them off, then he ends up being feminized, and also at the same time other things go wrong in development, and he ends up being left-handed. So developmental instability, mental problems, physical problems, all correlating. Being born prematurely is another one. That's a major environmental insult. It's associated with being left-handed.
Yeah.
Okay, anyway, so the other thing then that is associated with left-handedness is being an outlier. So although they are lower IQ on average, left-handed people, they have higher levels of outlier high IQ. So more sort of geniuses tend to be, and that could be because outlier high IQ happens because of weird genetic combinations, and happens in a way also because of just high mutational load. High mutational load is generally a bad thing, but it can be a good thing. Obviously, a mutation very rarely is a good thing. So you could have a mutation that makes you very, very intelligent, but that would come together then with mutations that would be negative. So therefore, you might end up with developmental instability plus very high IQ. So those are so yourself then, I've given you a number of indicators of what makes someone left-handed. Do any of them fit with you?
I'm not prone to violence. I have some other genetic defects, such as my jaw doesn't match on both sides. I only can chew on one side of my mouth because my teeth don't meet on this side of my mouth. When I was a child up to the age of 13, I used to stutter. That took me a long time to get over that. Yeah, I would say that.
You've lost quite a lot of your hair. and that is a correlate of testosterone. So people that have high testosterone tend to lose their hair. Doctors will tell you that the men that go to them aged about 60 saying they're impotent have all got like full heads of hair. So testosterone level, losing your hair. Your face shape is quite masculinized. So the chin is quite masculinized and whatever, and the whole shape of the face is masculinized. So it's relatively high testosterone. So that would correlate with being left-handed. So that could be what's going on there. But yeah, as I say, I don't know exactly. My understanding is that things like stutters, people often say, "Oh, stutters are due to trauma and things like that." But I've read that no, stutters are just a reflection of developmental instability at a much earlier stage, and issues such as this. And so again, that would be consistent with left-handedness. But of course, that's only an example of one. The other thing I wanted to ask you about while I've got you here, and I don't know if you're going to use this in the thing, but so you were given this award for working with very deprived people, or something like this. What was it that was about?
So I'd spent a decade working at Manchester Council, working mainly with young people on the streets, stopping them getting involved in crime, antisocial behaviour, that sort of work. And then in 2011, I took redundancy because austerity just kicked in. Manchester Council, not their fault, but we're letting thousands of people go. I think what's happened there? Get the video back. So I took redundancy and used my money to set up a charity to carry on working on the streets, helping in the inner city, the Greater Manchester, working with the young people, stop them getting involved in crime, getting them jobs, helping them. And for that, I was awarded an MBE.
And why did you want to do that? Are you, if you don't mind my asking, are you one of these like wounded healers?
No, pure coincidental. So I was self-employed up to being about 30. I then got a job at Manchester Airport, and I thought, this is easy, getting paid the same amount every month without having to worry about money. But I got bored of the airport, and then I got a job at Manchester Council on a trainee programme in my early 30s because I didn't know what else to do. And then I fell into working within the crime and disorder field, and I fell into working with young people. It wasn't that I wanted to do it. It turned out that I was good at it. And the reason why I was good at it is because I was one of those kids on those council estates, making some poor decisions. And
well, that's what I mean about the wounded healer concept. So that's the concept that you've been through something yourself, and therefore you're good at observing it in others and helping other people on renewal. So you were brought up on a sort of relatively rough estate.
It's a notorious Manchester Council estate known for drugs and gangs and guns and yeah.
What estate is that? What?
It's called the Anson Estate in Longsight in South Manchester.
Oh, okay. I thought South Manchester was quite posh. I had family from Altrincham. You know Altrincham?
Yeah. That's in Greater Manchester. It's not necessarily in Manchester. So you've got the city of Manchester, which is rough. But then when you go outside of that, still in Greater Manchester, you have Altrincham, you have Sale. There's some lovely areas.
Because I've only been to Manchester 3 times, and on 2 of those occasions, the first thing that happened upon my arrival was I was offered drugs. First,
so, yeah, that's Manchester city centre, and you was probably walking through Piccadilly Gardens.
I was at the station. I was at the main station in Manchester. Immediately getting off the train, hey mate, you want to buy some hashish? And then the second time I went there, went to some McDonald's or something. Again, second moment I get there, hey mate, you want to buy some hashish? And so yes, Manchester Piccadilly, yeah, that's the name of the station, isn't it? And then I had a friend that went to the University of Manchester, and where he lived was on Oxford Road, and he was walking into the centre of Manchester on a Saturday or something, and then suddenly someone just put a knife to his back, marched into a cash point, and demanded money for drugs. And said, "Look, I don't want to have to stab you, but I will stab you." And then while I need the money for drugs, and then while my friend was getting the money out, the guy was started having a conversation. I said, "So you do anything tonight, Saturday night?" And my friend goes, "Well, I was going to, but you're now robbing me." And he said, "Oh, I'm sorry about that." And he gave him 20 quid back of his own money, and said, "There you go, go out on the town, go and have a night out on me," kind of thing.
That doesn't surprise me because in society, I mean, like I said, I'm an expert in the field of crime and disorder, And what we've done over the last couple of decades, a lot with this woke nonsense, is we've legitimized some of this behavior. We've legitimized crime as a job. We've legitimized antisocial behavior as this is just our culture. And so it doesn't surprise me that that gentleman who's robbing your friend was half decent and gave him 20 quid to buy some pints, because this is just my job. This is what I do.
Well, it was 20 years ago. But yeah, I mean, another thing that, with wokeness that it kind of does is it gives you an excuse to just not even try. So it tells you that, particularly if you're black, it tells you there's a conspiracy against you. And that conspiracy is the system. That conspiracy is white males. That conspiracy is higher class people or whatever, and that's why you're like you are. And so it becomes a cope. It becomes a way of justifying your own failure. And you can say to yourself, "Oh well, I haven't done very much in life, but that's because I'm a rich white male. I've never had a chance, and they're all against me and trying to stop me." And it seems to me that people who advocate that idea, while unconsciously not believing it, will get ahead themselves, will come out of the working class or the black ghetto or whatever and get ahead themselves, but will be helping to eviscerate the competition by inculcating other people to genuinely believe it and thus not even try. So for a certain subgroup of intelligent blacks, intelligent working class whites, intelligent women, whatever it is, people on the minority, the grievance scale, the grievance aristocracy, it is actually a really adaptive thing to do. And I think that you get, there's a lot of research, I don't know how much of this we can say on YouTube, but there was a very interesting book by someone called J.F. Benenson called Warriors and Warriors. Warriors as in fighters, warriors as in people that worry. And it was about men and women and their different psychologies. And it's saying that women will genuinely believe that they are all equal. They will genuinely believe they are not trying to get status. They will genuinely believe that they are kind, while all the time subconsciously acting in their own interests to achieve status. And they'll all the time be telling people, oh yeah, equality important, being kind important, and whatever. And they'll genuinely even believe it, that it's true of them, but then they will actually be, and that's the most adaptive thing to do. So lie to yourself that oh yeah, I'm kind, I'm in favor of equality, I'm lovely, I'm wonderful, but then be actually, without even thinking about it, acting for your own selfish interest. And that's a lot of what wokeness does. Wokeness is these people like Hope Not Hate are saying, oh yeah, we should all be equal, we should all have equal status, but yet they are acting probably in a lot of cases, maybe even without thinking about, to get status. So it's a very clever and pernicious thing, and it's very damaging, I think, to impose that. I mean, that was the kind of thing. On the other hand, though, I guess there's a psychological, if you live in a meritocratic society and you are working, you're lower class, and you can say to yourself, oh, well, I would be something in life, but it's just that I was born poor and the system was against me or whatever, then you can maintain a certain sense of self-esteem. People like my grandparents' generation, there was no question of them going to school beyond the age of 14 or anything like that. But if you live in a society which says, like America, which says, look, everybody can do what they want, all you got to do is work hard, and you have failed, then, well, there's no way just to claw self-esteem back. It's that you have failed. And so you can see the way that they do claw self-esteem back, some of them, is via conspiracy theories, by saying, look, there's all these evil people and they're all trying to screw me over, and I know the truth. I may not be educated or whatever, but I know the deep truth. And so that's why they're more popular than in societies like Finland, where social trust is higher and there's less sort of social snobbery, and there's just more of a sense of, we're all Finns. And so interesting. Anyway, so I just thought I'd ask you about I was interested to know.
Let me just give you a bit of information about the sort of work I've been doing for 2 decades. So it is literally working on the streets. And talking to these young people is a lot of everything you've just said then. So, we'll come across lots of young people and we'll ask them, what help do you need? What, you're at school, what do you want to do when you leave school? What can we, help you with? Advice, guidance, let's talk about your plan, how you're going to get to be successful. Most of the time, the young people will say to us, I don't want to be anything. because what's the point of trying? Some people will go down the victimhood status and say, you know, what's the point of me trying? I'm poor, I'm black, I'm Muslim, I'm gay, whatever it is. There's no point in me trying. That's their gold-plated excuse for not to try, because there's no point trying. I've been told not to try because there's no point. But then we'll have other young people who will say, I appreciate life's hard. I appreciate that I live in, you know, a tough council estate, you know, and I'm not doing that well at school, but I feel there's more out there for me. I just don't know how to get it. And they're the young people we tend to work with the most, because they're halfway there. They know there's a better future for them. And it's about us trying to get them on the right path so they can achieve the success that they want, and they deem what success is for themselves. But the victim of culture is killing a whole generation of young people.
Yeah, and also there's evidence that people that are woke, white woke people, are less likely than people that are conservative to have working class friends or to have non-white friends. And so, and of course, the reason for that is because people that are woke ultimately, I mean, they're basically snobs. They're obsessed with power. They like power and prestige. They're narcissistic. And what's prestigious about hanging around with a person that's working class, or about hanging around with a person that's black, unless it's to look good because, oh, I've got a black friend, look at me, you know, I'm so non-racist. But so that they're not really interested in the poor. They're interested in, if they were, they'd all give up their jobs so that poor people and black people could do them. But and if they believe that poor people and black people are equal to them, then that would be no problem. So they would just give up their jobs. But of course they don't. They're just virtue signaling hypocrites. And what I've always liked about the people like that, people that aren't particularly educated, is they haven't imbibed this virtue signaling hypocritical ideology really. Some of them have, but there's a group among them that haven't. And they're sort of down to earth, and they've suffered, and they're not decadent, and they know what life's about. And they know that they have to kind of work hard and get through it. And it's terrible that they are being presented with this ideology that's basically saying to them, oh, it's okay, it's just your culture. It's okay for you not to learn to talk properly. It's okay for you not to learn to control your violent impulses. It's okay for you not to learn to be pro-social. It's okay because it's just your culture. We're all equal and we all have different cultures. And that is a way of stopping those people from competing for high status positions with people that are born into the upper middle class. And it's a very clever thing that they've done, to say, oh yeah, have your own, and your own culture is a culture of failure. And then they bring them, like now they have these woke policies of, let's bring more black people into Cambridge or Oxford or Durham or Bristol or whatever. Let's bring more working class people. But all that will happen is that the prestige will just move elsewhere, to wherever the upper class actually go. So it's terrible. It's very depressing. But anyway, it's very interesting to talk to you, and I'd love to have you on down the Jolly Heretic Public House at some point to talk about your work.
Absolutely, anytime.
Sometime in April, I could do it.
So, how can people find out more about you? How can people follow you? Your YouTube channel.
My website is edwarddutton.com. And then if you can, my YouTube channel, I live stream on Mondays and Thursdays. It's 7 p.m. UK time, 2 p.m. New York. I normally put up a video on YouTube every day except Sundays. They can get my books. I've got 19 books. I've got a new book coming out soon on eugenics, and I've got 19 books out at the moment, and they can buy those all on Amazon or from their bookshop or from the publisher. And I've got, you can see in the description under the videos, if they would like to support my work, how they can do that. And if they want to get in touch, then my email address is on my website, and I'm always happy to correspond with people.
Excellent. And I'll put all those details in the description of this video so people can go into this video and just click the links and take you to everything you just said there. So, Mr. Jolly Heretic, thank you so much for coming on. I've thoroughly enjoyed chatting to you. But I've learned some stuff as well along here today. So thank you so much.
Excellent. Thank you. Pleasure. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
That's great. Bye-bye.